Good evening and welcome this evening. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you civil rights pioneer Dr. Sonnie Hereford III. He's traveled the nation talking about his pivotal role in helping desegregate Alabama schools. Professor Hereford received his BS from Alabama A&M and his MD from Meharry Medical College. He told me he did his internship in Hammond, Indiana, close to my stomping ground. As a professor, he taught both anatomy and physiology at Alabama A&M and still had time to deliver 2,200 children during his career. Half of these deliveries occurred at home and one on a Trailways bus. Today, Dr. Hereford honors Mayo as an institution. As part of his speaking tour, he's already spoken at the University of Wisconsin in La Crosse and Viterbo College in La Crosse, and then honors Mayo tonight. On September 6, 1963, that's a Friday, he and his son returned to their Huntsville home after being turned away from the Fifth Avenue School, and this was in defiance of a federal court ruling. On September 2nd, Alabama Governor George Wallace, who was elected in January of 1963 on a platform of segregation yesterday, segregation today, and segregation forever, had ordered in defiance of a 5-judge federal court ruling that Fifth Avenue School and 3 other schools would close rather than admitting his son, Sonnie Hereford IV, and other black students. On arrival at the school, he met a mob of 200 to 300 people and 24 armed state troopers at the closed school when they arrived, which is not reminiscent of my first day of school. This is just unimaginable. And really, if you contemplate, it's no less a monumental event than when Ms. Parks sat down in the bus seat. In fact, she was facing a few angry bus passengers and an angry bus driver, not 24 armed troopers. And I think this is as momentous event as that was. For many individuals, this would simply be an obstacle and you would call it a day. In fact, Governor Wallace, in an effort to preserve the segregation, had actually offered vouchers to all the white parents to pay for private schooling outside of the public school system, which was overturned. And in fact, President Kennedy, who has about 10 weeks left to live, actually federalized the National Guard and ordered them back to barracks, because Governor Wallace was planning to use the National Guard to enforce the segregation law. So we move forward to Monday, September 9th, and that's when Sonnie enrolled his son at Fifth Avenue School in Huntsville and is credited with being the first black child to integrate a previously all-white public school in Alabama. Dr. Hereford filed the federal lawsuit that led to the desegregation of the Huntsville school system 9 years after Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 that had already ruled that segregation, separate but equal, was illegal. Subsequently, as you might imagine, Professor Hereford was the target of death threats and other intimidation. And when he solved this problem in part because when Dr. Hereford picked up the phone, he would identify himself as a Huntsville police officer. Whatever it takes. He was quoted as saying, "I don't recall being frightened. I was thinking that this was going to mean for the country, the city, and the whole state. Sure, I could have been injured, possibly killed, but no one person is bigger than the movement." His son, Sonnie Hereford IV, who's now 56 years old, earned his BA in electrical engineering from Notre Dame in '79, a master's in computer and systems engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York in 1985, and now serves as Chief Information Officer for the Army's Contracting Command. One of the reasons we're here when it's 6 below zero is because February is Black History Month. And we're here to celebrate the influences that African Americans have had on our history. Dr. Hereford's work has talked about integration, but it transcends integration. It transcends civil rights and it transcends human rights, because it's really about doing the right thing, which he certainly did, and he provided a legacy that honors all of us as Americans and certainly set the stage for generations of African Americans to succeed in this country. It's a testament to his creation of a true environment of inclusiveness, and it's my pleasure to introduce to the audience Sonnie Hereford IV.
Good afternoon. Dr. Woods, that was quite an introduction. I think I'm going to have to take you with me for my next presentation, if I may. But to Dr. Gertz and to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, to the African descendants, the Mayo employees, resource group, to faculty, visitors, I want to say that I'm very, very pleased to be here with you tonight. And they told you my name was S.W. Hereford III. I am the son of a preacher man, and my wife is a coal miner's daughter. I thank you for inviting me, and such hospitality here. Such hospitality over in La Crosse also. I'm telling you, I was telling the two ladies that went on the tour with me this morning, I ran into at least two things that I never had before. And I just want to mention them briefly. First of all, every time I was to meet a person, then Ms. Mickelson gave me a bio on that person. I've never had that before. And then last night, when I went to bed, I called down to the front office and I said, I'd like a wake-up call at 6:30. The phone rang at the appointed hour, and a soft, feminine voice on the other end said, "This is the time you asked me to wake you up. Would you like 10 more minutes?" I've never had that before. Just wait till I tell my wife when I get home. Would you like 10 more minutes? Now, usually I start off my presentation with a film clip, a highlight film clip from my full-length film, and I guess we'll tell you about the films after a while. But a professor from a university close to my home called me about 2 years ago and asked me if his class could come out and interview my son and me. And I told him yes. And he said, well, I tell you what, we'll come over there and we'll do that. And he brought some teenagers over there, and they did an interview and made a little film clip. And I was so impressed by it until I would like to show you that tonight. It just goes 10 minutes. And so I'm going to ask the people in the AV department up there to go ahead and start that now. And then I'll come back and talk to you some more.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies.
Every year in the month of February, we pay homage to all the men and women who came before us to lead us toward a brighter future. Because of these remarkable leaders, these pioneers of social justice, we African Americans now have the right of equality in voting, employment, and in education. In this special presentation, we are honoring a man who played a huge part in securing the rights of African Americans right here in Huntsville, Alabama. Dr. Sonnie Hereford was a pioneer in the civil rights movement whose story has remained largely untold.
That was quite an experience. How much time do you have?
Hi, my name is Myra Rutledge, and I'm at the site of the Spine and Neuro Center of Huntsville Hospital, which was once the Fifth Avenue School where Dr. Sonnie Hereford enrolled his son to become the first black student to be enrolled in Alabama public school system.
The reason why I got into the civil rights movement is because I had been treated so badly in so many instances by so many people.
Dr. Hereford was fighting for civil rights in Alabama during a time where separate but equal was claimed to have been in the school system. But there was nothing equal about the poor resources in the black schools in Huntsville, Alabama. There was one school to which black students were admitted in Huntsville, Alabama, which had no cafeteria, no library, and no playground. And that wasn't the only thing that was less than equal. Dr. Hereford goes on to describe the less than equal conditions of the healthcare facilities in Huntsville, Alabama.
At the Huntsville Hospital, they had the patients separate. They had a separate part of the hospital they called the annex that was donated by a philanthropist called Mrs. McCormick. And she had that wing built for colored patients. The wing had 13 beds, only 13 beds. So if there were more than 13 people ill, then the others had to be housed out in the hall. And so there were men walking up and down the hall, and there were women out in the hall, and beds in the hall, nurses giving them injections and giving them baths and things like that. We had one room at the Huntsville Hospital that served as the emergency room, the operating room, and the delivery room. And one does not have to be a nurse or a doctor to know that that can really, really be a problem. Also, there were vacant rooms on the white side, but even though it was overcrowded, on the colored side, could not move the patients over there.
Here we see that even down to the medical health care, the most basic human rights of African Americans were being challenged on a daily basis. During this time, blacks in Huntsville began to organize marches and sit-ins in which they would express their discontentment with the treatment they received as opposed to the whites. During the marches, men, women, and even children would rally together and walk down the streets, holding up posters that said things like, "The Civil War is over." During sit-ins, similar signs were held up, some displaying phrases such as, "I ordered a hamburger, and they served me a warrant." In 1962, local civil rights activists invited Dr. Martin Luther King to come and do some momentum in the civil rights movement here in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm standing at the site of the Oakwood University Ashby Auditorium, where Dr. King came and delivered a speech powerful and akin to that of his I Have a Dream speech.
But if there's a victory, it will be a victory for justice.
The black community of Huntsville was more than happy to receive Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Hereford was right there to meet him in person as soon as he exited the plane. He escorted Dr. King around town to each of his speaking engagements as he diligently worked beside him to stir movement within the community. Oakwood College at the time was the only school in Huntsville at which Dr. King could speak, due to the fact that it was a private institution.
But it is a tension between justice and injustice. It is a struggle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness.
On top of being a family doctor, Dr. Hereford served as the chairman of the educational committee. He goes on to describe how his position within the Huntsville, Alabama school system served as a catalyst for his involvement in the local civil rights movement.
I was the chairman of the education committee. Okay. If you're the captain in the cavalry, You don't hide behind a tree and order the enlisted men to take the hill, right? You draw your saber, you order the bugler to sound charge, and you say, follow me and let's go take the hill, right? So, I had a son who was 5 years old and just turned 6, 5 days before time for school to open. Now, why don't I enroll my son? You see. So then we decided that we'd file a suit. We had a legal advisor who had advised us that you don't have to get out here in the street and march to get the schools open. He said there's no law that says that the restaurant has to serve you, so you might have to march for that. But the school, he said, the Supreme Court has already outlawed segregation in school. Brown versus Board was in 54. And here we are in 62. And our school board had not made a single move, no effort whatsoever. So we found out that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund would assist us in filing the suit.
Dr. Hereford followed through with the lawsuit so that his son could gain admission into the Fifth Avenue School. Because Brown versus Board of Education had already been settled, the case was ruled in favor of Dr. Hereford's son. While Dr. Hereford was pressing forward with the movement, his 5-year-old son was doing what he could to help progress things.
In 62 and 63, now again I was 4 or 5, 6 years old back in those days. I did some marching. I wasn't old enough to participate in the planning and that sort of thing, but I did some marching, and my father has some footage of me, carrying some of the signs. I think in one of them I have a sign that says, youngsters want freedom too, or youngsters like freedom too, something like that. So I did get a chance to participate, and then of course on September 9th, 1963, was when I became the first black child to integrate the schools in Alabama.
Sonnie Hereford's early encounters with discrimination led him to believe that racism was nothing more than sheer ignorance. He goes on to describe how that same ignorance gave him hope.
I remember in first grade going to the cafeteria, and it was the old-style cafeteria where you have the rails and the stack of trays, and you take your tray down off the stack and slide it along the rail, and then there were ladies there that would give you, food on the plates and so on. And I remember being near a little girl who was shorter than I was and wasn't able to get her tray down off the stack, and so I took the tray down for her. I went to hand it to her, and she looked me right in the eye and said, "Oh no, my mother told me never to take anything from a nigger." Even at the age of 6, that was so important, I think, in my development and understanding, because I knew that that little girl didn't know what she was saying to me, and it was her mother speaking through her. And the lesson that taught me is that, because she didn't know what she was saying, is that we're not born with those prejudices. And we don't have those prejudices until someone teaches us those prejudices, usually a family member or a friend or something like that. I think that the people that participated in the civil rights movement are genuine heroes, very brave, very well organized, that they knew that they had to do things in a certain way. They knew that if people were getting injured and property getting destroyed, that would have put an end to the movement. And they were very smart about the way that they did that. And so that's tell those stories. I want people to understand that things weren't always, the way that they are now. And it took a lot of sacrifice, and it took a lot of brave people doing some brave things to bring this about. So I want people like my father and mother and the people who worked with them, and I don't count myself among them because I was really too young to know what was going on. But there were a lot of college students and a lot of adults who participated in the movement, and I want their sacrifices and their heroism to be recognized.
The story of the Herefords is but another page in the book of Black history. They, alongside other activists, helped to bring about racial equality in the South. We thank them for their contribution to what Huntsville, Alabama is today.
Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won.
Don't you think those teenagers did a good job with that? Can you hear me in the back all right? You can? Okay. Well, once again, I want to thank you for inviting me. And your theme, embrace the past, celebrate the present, and prepare for the future, right? And we're going to do a little bit of celebrating, embracing the past, and then we'll celebrate. Now, how did I get here? How did I get here? In the fall of '07, I sent out some flyers to a number of universities saying that I was available to come and do civil rights presentations. And I didn't hear back from nearly as many as I thought I would hear from. But then there was a professor over at University of Wisconsin at La Crosse named Dr. Bob. And he called me and asked me if I could come up here. He called me about first week in January of '08. Can I come up and talk to his students? I said, well, Dr. Bob, it's so cold up there. And I said, Dr. Bob, I have a heavy schedule. So he said, Dr. Hereford, you don't think you can come? I said, Doc, I don't think I can come right now. So he said, I tell you what, we're going to go down to the Civil Rights Museum in Birmingham in March, 1st of April, last of March, 1st of April. I'll just put the students on the bus and bring them to you. Man, can you imagine how that made my chest stick out? He's going to bring the kids to me. So he put the students on the bus, and they came down there, and they met me at the university, the same university where these kids are that made this tape there that you just saw. And I met them there, and we just had a big time. And then I didn't hear from Dr. Bob anymore until, let's see, I guess it was the fall of 2012. And he said, Dr. Hereford, we're going to come again. So then he brought them down in March of 2013, and I met him at another institution called Calhoun University, and Calhoun College it is, and that's where I had just retired from teaching, and we had a big time. Then this summer, back in August, the people from over at University of Wisconsin at La Crosse called me. It was the Black Students Unity, and they said, can you come up in February and talk to us? And I mentioned it to my wife. She said, you going up there and is that cold? I said, well, honey, they've come to me twice, and why can't I go to them once? And so I decided to come up, and then they talked to me on conference call with a gentleman named Mr. Thomas Harris. He's sitting over there now. And on conference call, and Mr. Harris was visiting down in Birmingham in December, this past December, and he stopped by my house, and we just had a delightful time together there at my house. And he said, well, if you come up, you're going to have to land in Rochester. I said, Mayo Clinic. He said, yeah, Rochester. I said, well, maybe then I can get a chance to speak there too. And he said, I'll start working on it. And he started working on it, and he and Miss Mickelson made it happen. And so that's how I got to be here right now. Okay, now I want to tell you something about my family. They said that I was Sonnie Hereford III, didn't they? Oh, first of all, let me mention to you about my ethnicity, if you have any concerns about that. After talking to my ancestors, I've reached this conclusion. Now, maybe off a millimeter or so. I'm about that much Native American, and about that much Anglo-American, and about that much African-American. So that's who I am. Now, they say it's Sonnie Hereford III. That implied that there must have been some other Sonnie Herefords, right? Sonnie Hereford first, I want to mention something to you. He was born a slave. And then later, he was about 15 years old when they signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and he became a sharecropper. But before he died, he owned the property, and he had sharecroppers. And so he was a wise old man. He used to tell me, if you want to get through this life, obey the law. Try to help somebody. Be kind to people, he said, and it doesn't hurt to know folks in high places. Sonnie Hereford II was a member of the armed forces, and he told me something when I was about 10 years old that really stuck with me. He served in France, and he said armistice had been declared, and his commanding officer called all the soldiers together, just a whole lot of soldiers. All of the enlisted men were black, and all of the officers were white. You know how that used to be. And he said, commanding officer, I tried to imagine how he fixed this, the commanding officer. He said, men, you have fought valiantly, and you have done precisely what President Wilson said. You have made the world safe for democracy. Now I want to talk to you colored soldiers. In a few short weeks, we're going to be going home. And I know that some of you are married to these French women. And I know that some of you have small children. And I know that some of you have babies on the way. You cannot take your wives home with you. You have two options. You can get a divorce from your wife and come home with your unit, or you can get a discharge from the army and stay in France with your family. Those are your two options. He said, I would like to have your decision on my desk at 0900 Monday. He gave them a whole weekend to make the biggest decision of their life. And when my daddy told me that, I thought that was the awfulest thing in the world, for them to break up those families like that. But that's the kind of thing we used to have to deal with. Now, in my early years when I was coming up in Huntsville, I was involved in what I consider a few unique situations, and I shall mention them to you and let you reach your own conclusion, what you think they were unique or not. The first thing, I've touched on it, is that we were sharecroppers, you see? So we lived on a large farm that was owned by a Caucasian man who lived in York Harbor, Maine. And we were his sharecroppers, and he never came to Huntsville except in November so he could collect 1/4 of our profit. But adjacent to his farm was a small farm that my daddy and granddaddy had purchased for $100 an acre, and we had sharecroppers. So we were sharecroppers and we had sharecroppers. Have you ever heard of that before? Then the other thing I thought was unique, we lived in the country, way out in the country, but my brother and I went to school in town. And we got what I thought was a pretty good education in town. And so I woke up one day when I was 20 years old and I said, gee, this is cool. I know everything the country boys know and almost everything the city boys know. And that turned out to be a tremendous advantage. The other thing I want to mention to you that I think is unique, and you may not believe this, I received my bachelor's degree one Monday and my doctorate degree the next Monday. Have you ever heard of that? Another thing that was unique, I used to be the school doctor for 2 colleges, and I made house calls to the dormitory. Have you ever heard of that? I don't think you have. Another unique thing, I've never had a cigarette in my mouth. I'm 83. I've never had a drink of alcoholic beverages, and I've never owned a firearm of any description, not even a hunting rifle. Now to talk to you a little bit about life in Alabama. Everything was separate but equal. You know about that, don't you? Separate but equal. White people on one side of town, black people on the other side of town. We could not go to Burger King. I talked to some youngsters about that. So we couldn't go to Burger King, we couldn't go to McDonald's. It's sort of hard to believe, isn't it? But that's the way it was. Just to put it in perspective, now, you know Huntsville is in North Alabama, right across the Tennessee border. And Mobile is down on the Gulf, all the way down on the Gulf. And I used to think, I said, now, if one of my relatives in Mobile got sick and I decided to go down there. Can you imagine this? There's nowhere between Huntsville and Mobile that I could get a drink of water. No place I could use the restroom. No place I could get any food. And no place, if I got sleepy, I couldn't find a place to sleep. Even if my car broke down, I couldn't find a place to sleep. If they were renting the rooms for $10, and I offered the proprietor $100, I could not get a place to sleep. You were not going to get it. You could talk till you got blue in the face. You were not going to get a place to sleep. But that's just the way it used to be there with public facilities. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about education, other than what you saw on the film already. Can you see this in the back? You can see it. You see a little red dot? That's my high school. You see that shaded part? That's the city dump. My high school was in the midst of a city dump, surrounded it on three sides like a horseshoe. Matter of fact, in my book, and some of you have my book, I call it the horseshoe phenomenon. That I was in the middle of that city dump. Now I want you to think about something. We didn't have air conditioning. You had to have the windows up. Imagine trying to study in that high school in early September and late May. And they're out there burning trash. I wanted to be a physician. That school had no library, and I could not use the public library. I was 33 years old before I could use the public library in my hometown where my daddy and my granddaddy paid taxes all their life. 33 years old. The school had no gymnasium. It had no lunchroom. It had no physics lab, no chemistry lab, no biology lab. If you want to be a doctor, don't you think that would have been a pretty good thing to have? But it did not have that. We had no school buses. The city board had school buses, but the black kids couldn't ride the school buses. I had to walk 6 miles. Even when I was 6 years old, I had to walk 6 miles one way. 6 miles to school and 6 miles back, and it was uphill each way. Dark when I left home and dark when I got back home. How about that? But that's what. Now, what I remember about a school bus, all dirt roads. If the school bus passed by me fast, me and some other kids, it would blow dust in our face. And if it passed by us slowly, rotten eggs and rotten tomatoes would come from the windows of those school buses and hit us in the chest and in the face. That's what I remember about a school bus. I'm 83 years old. I've never been on a school bus in my life. If you promised me $1 million to describe what it looks like on the inside of a school bus, I couldn't tell you. Never. Never a school bus. We did have something in that school. We had good teachers and we had dedicated students. And then I mentioned to somebody the other day, I said, now that was the city school. The county schools were a joke. The county schools in Alabama were a joke. They were taught in the churches. My daddy didn't want me to go to a county school. They were taught in the churches. They had a Franklin stove, and the teacher had to come early and take kindling and start the fire for the kids. And the parents had to furnish the fuel. Can you imagine that? That's what we had in Alabama. One teacher for 70 or 80 students, and she taught every grade and every subject in the grade. Now, how in the world could you get a good education if you go into a county school in Alabama? They didn't have a blackboard. They had lapboards and slates. That was all they had. So that's the way the education system was. Healthcare. She mentioned about we mentioned on the film about the ladies out in the hall and all that business. We had one room, operating room, delivery room, and what was the operating room? Emergency room. That's what the black people had. Now I want to tell you about my experience with the getting on the staff. When I left medical school and finished my internship and I went to set up my practice in Huntsville, then naturally you need to be on some sort of hospital staff, don't you, if you're going to try to practice. And I was doing family practice and doing deliveries, so you need hospital. So I went to talk to the chief of staff, and this is what he told me, and I quote. He says, Dr. Hereford, you cannot be a full-fledged member of the medical staff because the bylaws of the hospital says that in order to be a full-fledged member, you have to be a member of the County Medical Society. And the bylaws of the County Medical Society say you have to be white. So you can be an associate member and you can admit your patients and treat your patients and get consultations and get x-rays and lab work and all that business, but you cannot be a full-fledged member. He said, now, you must come to the meetings. And the meetings are going to be every first Wednesday. But you come at 7 because the white doctors are going to be eating supper at 6:30. You come at 7. And when you come, make sure you sit in the cafeteria. Make sure you turn your cup upside down so that the waitress won't inadvertently pour you a cup of coffee. Can you imagine that? Now I want to tell you about the first staff meeting that I attended. Now here's a young doctor just getting out of school, a young black doctor, and he had just come to town. The first staff meeting I went to, I was about 10 minutes late because I had to treat a patient in the emergency room. And when I walked into the staff meeting 10 minutes past 7, the meeting had started and they were hearing a report from the tissue committee, doctor. And there was an old surgeon there who had removed a black woman's womb. And apparently the tissue committee and the pathologist felt that it was unnecessary for him to have removed her womb. And they were giving him a hard time about removing her womb. And I think he felt that he might be sanctioned, and might be his surgical privileges might be restricted for a while and might be cut off. And they were giving him a hard time, and he was turning redder and redder all the time. And finally, he just couldn't take it anymore. And this is what he said to them, and I quote, all of y'all done practice here in the South. This woman was an ignorant nigger woman. And ain't no ignorant nigger woman gonna come to you and keep her appointments and take her medicine like you tell her to. That's why I took her womb out and didn't treat her medically. Case closed. They did not say one more word to him about that case. And that was my first meeting. Can you imagine how that made me feel? But that's the situation we had there. Now, in the hospital, they had no eating facilities for the black doctors and the black nurses, and the nurses had 12-hour shifts. Can you imagine a lady leaving home and coming to work for an institution as a nurse, and they don't have anywhere she can get anything to eat, and nobody seemed to care about it, that they didn't have it. And so it was about 63, about the same time when we integrated to school, that they allowed the black people to come through the line at the cafeteria and get some food, but you had to go to a separate room. And then the next year, they allowed them to eat with all of the other people. And the first few days, you could cut the tension with a knife. I say that in my book. You could actually cut the tension with a knife with the black and the white people eating together. Now, something about the jobs. The black people were the last to be hired and the first to be fired. And then, even if you got a job, you had a separate pay scale. Have you heard about that? Black people and white people making different money doing the same job. I had a cousin who was working at the Huntsville Hospital as an attendant. We used to call it an orderly. He was working as an attendant, and he was making 25 cents an hour, and the white orderlies were making 45 cents an hour. And they were all doing the same work. And I did not know, when I was growing up, I did not know a single black individual that had any supervisory job. Then we were fortunate enough to have a military installation. They moved the missile program down there. You've heard of Redstone Arsenal with von Braun and his missile going to go to the moon. Military installation there. 20,000 people working on that military installation. 150 black people, and they were all in menial capacities. The ones that I knew, they were janitors and porters and maids. And they didn't have any high-tech people, and that was when President Kennedy said, you got to hire some black people as high-tech workers. And they said, we can't find any qualified. He said, you better find somebody else. We're going to move this installation. And they sent to Washington, and they sent to Cape Canaveral, and they sent to Philadelphia, and they found some. I'm telling you, because they didn't want to lose the military installation, because by now this is over half of our economy. Like here, Mayo Clinic is a lot of your economy, isn't it? Well, that's the same way the missile installation was there in Huntsville. But that's the situation on jobs. I helped build buildings on Redstone Arsenal to help to pay for my tuition when I was a sophomore. Wore a hard hat. I worked on a job for $1 an hour, and my foreman was a white man making $2 an hour, and he couldn't write his own name. He said nothing to write my name, and I'm a sophomore in medical school. I used to have him with his timesheet. But he was my supervisor. In the criminal justice system, when I got old enough to read the newspaper, I looked in the newspaper, and I saw it said, Joe Blow, black man, down the street here, caught shoplifting, 5 years in the penitentiary. Mr. Joe Smart, vice president of the bank, embezzled $500,000. 6 months in jail, $50,000 fine, 2 years probation, and 20 hours community service. I said, Brian, that doesn't seem right to me. They said, you don't understand, that was a white-collar crime. You can't punish him like you punished the other man. But it just didn't seem right to me. Talk to you about the city government. When I was a youngster, we had 5 districts in the city, and we had at-large elections. 20% black population, and only about 10% of those voting, you see? And we never would have gotten any black people in any offices because they had at-large elections. In other words, everybody all over the city voted for all 5 positions. And one of my students at Alabama A&M, I used to teach anatomy and physiology, one of my students sued to have it changed, and then they had district elections. And guess what we have now? We have 40% minorities on the city council, 20% minorities on the school board, and the president of the school board is a girl I delivered. How about that? And then, I want to say something else about that girl that I delivered. This past September, we had the 50th anniversary of the school integration. And the president of the school board got up at the 50th anniversary, and she made this announcement. She said, pretty soon we're going to tear down a school that we have here called University Place, and we're going to rebuild it and make it bigger on a different site. And when the new name goes up, it's not going to be University Place, it's going to be S.W. Hereford School. And for them to make that announcement, and they blindsided me. I didn't know they were planning that. And for the lady to make it was a lady that I delivered. You know how that made me feel. I'm telling you. We didn't have any black policemen, no black firemen. They had a few black policemen in Birmingham, but they couldn't arrest any white people. Can you imagine that? You're on the police force. You see a white man violating the law, you can't arrest him. You can call a white policeman if he gets there in time to arrest him. Wasn't that stupid? I'm telling you. That's what they had. Voting. Talk about voting. All of you vote, and you just go up there and vote, don't you? Right? Well, let me tell you what happened when I got ready to vote. First of all, you had to be either Dick Tracy or Columbo to find out where the registration site was. Nobody would tell you where the registration site was, you see. And they didn't put it in the paper, they didn't put it on the radio, didn't put it on TV. Then you had to go and find somebody who was already a registered voter. This is the law they had in Alabama. You have to find somebody who's already a registered voter to go with you and vouch for you and say that you're a good, upstanding citizen. Well, it wasn't many black people registered. And besides, they had to work. They wasn't going to leave their job to go with you, and no white person was going to go with you. So you see how that hampered it? Now, when I went to vote, I had to pass a written test, I had to pass an oral test, and then I had to interpret the Constitution, as they said, to the satisfaction of the examiner. He could flunk almost anybody, couldn't he? But that's what I had to do. Then after you passed all of that, now you got to go to the courthouse and pay your poll tax. And a lot of people didn't vote because they couldn't pay the poll tax. They needed to go to the grocery store and the drugstore. And they couldn't pay that poll tax, but that's what they had. They don't have poll tax now, and I'm so glad that they don't. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about that. Now I want to talk to you a minute about postgraduate courses. Do you agree that anybody who's been out of his formal training for a good bit, that he needs to go back and take some refresher courses and try to find out what's new in his field, right? And would you think in medicine it would probably be more important than in some other fields, right? Well, I finished medical school in 55. And I finished my internship in 56. We were just talking about that. Internship in 56. In 1960, I hadn't had any postgraduate courses. How come? Because in Alabama, all medical postgraduate courses were given in the hotels. And if you were black, you couldn't go through the front door of the hotel. If you worked in the hotel, you could go through the back door. But otherwise, no black person could go in any hotel in Alabama. So I knew I needed to take some postgraduate course. I called the IRS. I said, listen, if a person takes a postgraduate course and it's away from his city, can he write it off as a business expense? He said, yes. He said, but now you have to be strict. You have to remember this. First of all, it has to be something that's going to make you more proficient in your profession, and it has to be something that you can't get in your locale. My first postgraduate course was in Paris. Matter of fact, it was called April in Paris. Then about a year and a half later, I got a flyer came across my desk from University of Southern California. It says, come and spend August with us in Hawaii. So my second postgraduate course was in Honolulu. So my wife and I drove to California and then got on a plane and we went to Honolulu, flew to Honolulu, and we got there, and the gentleman you see, I took this course for several reasons. First, because I knew I needed to take postgraduate course, and next I went to a small college and a small medical school, and I wanted to be an alumnus of a large university. So I signed up for that course with USC. So we got there, and the gentleman who had organized the course was the dean of medicine at USC, called Dr. Manning, and he had about 10 doctors from the California area, the Los Angeles area on his staff. He had gynecologists, he had radiologists, he had pediatricians, he had cardiologists, he had everybody on his staff, and it had about 100 doctors. Students, you see. So after we'd been there about 2 days, the governor had a big luau, and he invited all the doctors and their wives. And so my wife and I sitting there at the table, and I looked around. This is more food than I've ever had in my life, and I'm eating with all these celebrities here. And I said, in Huntsville, they won't even let me eat at the greasy spoon. And I said, okay, now I'm eating here. So my wife touched me on the shoulder and she said, do you know who that is sitting across the table from us? I said, that's Dr. McNulty. He's my gynecology teacher. He told me this morning Dennis Day was his brother. Dennis Day, the singer, is his brother. She said, but do you know who that is sitting next to him? I said, well, that's his wife. It better be his wife. And she said, no, Sonny. She said, that's Ann Blythe, the movie star. I said, what? I'm eating with Ann Blythe? And in Huntsville, they won't even let me eat at the greasy spoon. And I apologized for not having recognized her, and she accepted my apology. You know, she's one of my favorite movie stars, but I guess it just didn't occur to me that I'm sitting here eating with a movie star. So about 2 nights later, we went to another party, and incidentally, class from 8 till 12. And after 12 o'clock noon, you could do anything you felt big enough to do, you know. So I forgot to mention that. So another party, and anybody, some of you in here old enough to know about How Warrior and I. How Warrior and I had a lady in there called Cricket, Connie Stevens. She was at the party. Movie star. I could have danced with her, but I didn't know how to dance. And I'm thinking, I said, I must be the only black man in Alabama who doesn't know how to dance. So anyway, we completed our course, and we came back to Los Angeles. And the graduating guy from my class was a psychiatrist in Beverly Hills, and he said, I'm going to take you to dinner in Hollywood. So we went to dinner, and we were sitting there eating in the booth, and this time he touched me on the shoulder. He said, don't look around right now. But that was Barbara Stanwyck just sat behind you here in this booth. I said, my God, I'm eating with Barbara Stanwyck. He said, I said, man, you know, in Huntsville, they won't even let me eat at the greasy spoon. And so we left Los Angeles, and we started driving home and got to Arizona, and we got to a place and stopped to get gas, and the guy had a little restaurant there on to his service station, and we decided we'd go in and get something to eat. And he stopped us at the door. He said, may I help you? I said, well, we want to eat. He said, well, if you're going to take it with you, I can give you something. He said, but otherwise, we don't feed them here. That's what he told me. In Arizona, we don't feed them here. So we refused to get the sandwiches and take them with us, and we went on to a vending machine, and we got Tom's peanut butter sandwiches, and we ate. And we drove on back to El Paso, where we had a reservation for a room, and we got there, and the man had given our room away, and they had cars at this black motel, that was stacked 3 deep, and people waiting on somebody else to go in there and sleep and then come out so they could go in there. And the man said, I had to give you room away, doctor. He said, they were going to shoot me if I hadn't given you room away. He gave it away. We went to a service station to get some gas. Little Mexican gentleman, about 19 years old, was filling up our car. And I said, is it anywhere in El Paso that my wife and I can get a room? Listen, we were in a convertible, and they talk about things big in Texas. They got big mosquitoes in Texas. They were eating us up. And we sitting out there in the car. He said, I said, is it anywhere in El Paso that I can get a motel? He said, no, senor. I said, well, is it anywhere you can get a motel? He said, si, senor. I said, well, if I cross the border, can I get a motel? And I quote, he said, senor, if you have the money, you can sleep anywhere in Mexico. Can you imagine how that made me feel? I can't get a room in my own country, but if I go across the border and go to a foreign country, I can get a room. We got back to Huntsville. I was ready for any kind of civil rights activities. I'm telling you. And the movement started that January, but I need to backtrack and tell you one more thing about Honolulu. I was, about 2 years ago, I was sitting down in my den watching the 6 o'clock news. I wasn't meddling at anybody. I was minding my own business. And Donald Trump made the president put his birth certificate on the screen. Am I right? And I looked at the birth certificate, and it said he was born August the 3rd, 1961. I ran in the trophy room to look at my certificate. I was there. Can you imagine? I was at this end of the street at Triple Army Hospital taking postgraduate courses, and the president was born at the hospital down the street. If it hadn't been for Donald Trump, I never would have known that. I'm telling you. But anyway, we got back. And at Huntsville, and the movement started January 3rd. Started off low key. We didn't want to go in there with the trumpets blasting and the drum roll and the searchlights in the air and all of that. Started low key. We just had like informal meetings with the mayor and the city council. We wanted the mayor to establish a biracial committee because we had found out in other cities where they had biracial committees that things went more smoothly, you see. And the mayor said, biracial committee, he said, I don't know what we need there. He said, we ain't got no racial problems in Huntsville. He said, black people and white people stand in the same line at the bank. They stand in the same line at the post office. What kind of racial problems are you talking about? We said, well, at the courthouse, you got these signs say colored women and colored men and white women and white men, and then you got drinking fountains that colored and white, and some of the stores don't have any drinking fountains at all for colored people. They got for colored and white, and some of the others don't have any at all. Said we go to the store to try on a suit, and if you need to use the restroom, they don't have a restroom we can use, so that's a problem. And so he said, well, no, I don't think we're having a problem. So then we started with the picketing. You saw those kids picketing, didn't you? And then we started sitting in. Everybody knows what sitting in is, isn't it? So the guy has a restaurant, lunch counter, and he has 13 stools, and we take 13 students down there, and each one sits on a stool, and he said, okay, you might not serve me, but you ain't going to serve nobody else today, not on this stool. And they would sit there all day long until the powers that be went into the old books, and they found an old law, vagrancy law, says trespass after a warning. And the proprietor would come by and say, I don't want you here. I'm not going to serve you. I don't want you here, and I'm asking you to leave. And if you didn't leave, he would call the policeman, and he would put you in jail, and they would give you a $100 fine. That's like $1,000 now, isn't it? $1,100. And 6 months hard labor. That's what the mandate was. 6 months hard labor for trespass after a warning. And the policeman was walking around with John Doe warrants, and he was arresting those kids just as fast as he could, and we were bailing them out just as fast as he would arrest them, because we wanted the kids out here protesting, not in jail, you see. So then it looked like we wasn't getting anywhere, and we said, well, we got to try another tactic. We had committee, and we would meet 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week. Start at 7 o'clock and sometimes meet till 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, trying to plan strategy. We said, well, some of the cities had a boycott, and that works pretty good. Everybody knows what a boycott is. My daughter's an English professor. She said, if you talk, you better tell them now if you don't know what a boycott is. But see, you're all adults, aren't you? So I talk to kids, so you know what a boycott is. Now, look on your calendar and see what the 3 bonanza sales period are. Christmas, Easter, and back to school. Am I right? That's when they sell the most. They're almost exactly 4 months apart. So anytime you want to start a boycott, you can start one. You see what I mean? They're almost exactly 4 months apart. So our movement started in January, and it was around about this time when we really started working with the boycott. Easter's coming up, isn't it? But you don't walk up to the merchant and tell him, if you don't hire some black clerks by May the 15th, we're going to stop buying here. Don't tell that guy that. Easter's coming up. Let him go and borrow money from the bank and go and buy his stock. And just let him stock all of his racks and all of his shelves here with all of these fineries. And that's what we let them do. And we didn't go in to buy. You see what I mean? And we decided on Easter we're going to wear blue jeans. It cost $2.50. We didn't buy them in Huntsville. We bought them in the adjacent cities, 20, 30 miles away. We didn't even want them to have the $2.50, you see? So we had some help with that boycott that we hadn't anticipated. There were about 20,000 black people in town and in the county, and 95% of them were not going to buy. So we knew we could count on that. But we had some people, white people who belonged to labor unions, and they didn't cross our picket line. We didn't think that was going to happen, but it happened. Then we had some white people who, didn't have shopping centers. Everything was downtown, you see. This we're talking about 62. White people who didn't come downtown because there was too much commotion going on down there. All of this marching and demonstrating and all of that, they didn't come. Then there were white people who came downtown to cheer us and egg us on. Then they had white people who came downtown to taunt us and jeer us. None of these people were buying. They wasn't in the store buying. They were out there taunting us. You see what I mean? You understand what I'm saying? It was successful beyond our wildest dream. We estimate that the merchants missed at least $1 million for that Easter. Now, by today's standards, what you're talking about, 10, 11, 12 million, right? It was $1 million in 1962. And so the mayor said, well, maybe we do need to get that biracial committee. So he began to establish a biracial committee, and we suggested 2 blacks to go on the committee, and he said couldn't find anybody white. Can't find nobody white to go on the committee. So they'd been arresting kids, and didn't look like we were getting anywhere much, so we decided we'd set a trap. Another doctor in town had a young baby, 3 months old, and my wife was 7 months pregnant. So we let them go to the restaurant, and they took the bait. They sat down at the restaurant, and the policeman, after the man asked them to leave, they wouldn't leave. The policeman came and arrested them, put them in jail. And the word got out. They got these 2 doctors' wives in jail, and they tried their best to get them to go home, and they wouldn't go home. They said, you arrested us, we're going to stay here. They conducted a sit-in right there in jail because they had a student with them, and they said they're going to let the ladies go home, but they weren't going to let the student go home. They said, well, no, when we leave, we're all going to leave together. So they wouldn't leave, and the people really rallied to their cause, so that put the black people, on. They really joined hands with us then, and everybody was joining the movement. My wife expecting, and the other doctor's wife with a suckling baby. Can you imagine our delegate to the UN, and he's up there telling some of those people from the third world how to treat their folks, and this guy got a newspaper in his hand from the third world. I see here in the newspaper where they arrested 2 ladies down in Alabama. What were their charges? He said, well, they were trying to get hamburgers. Oh, stealing hamburgers. I said, no, they were going to pay for them. They were going to pay for them? I don't understand. You see what I mean? Wasn't that stupid? Somebody come and trying to give you business and you put them in jail. That is stupid. I'm telling you. And then I was telling the ladies who went with me today on the tour something else I thought was stupid. I got to tell you this, digress a little bit. When I was about 14 years old, there was a gentleman who was a photographer, and he was an excellent photographer, a white man, opened his photography shop just on the edge of the black community. But he wanted the people to know that he accepted all trade, black and white. So this guy has a big picture frame window there, and he has a table right by the window, and he put photographs and portraits all on that table. I guess it must have been 25 or 30. And they were all mixed up. And that's what I saw when he had the grand opening. And then I went by about 2 weeks later, and he had all the black pictures on the right and all the white pictures on the left. And then I went by about 10 days later, and he had built a cardboard fence and put a fence between the white photographs and the black photographs. I thought to myself, isn't that stupid? but that's what he did. But now we're talking about the civil rights movement. So then the mayor finally got this biracial committee together, and they started talking to the merchants, and the merchants agreed to hire some black people, and they agreed to let the black people come into the lunch counter, but they said, we're going to do it like this now. We're going to have a trial period, and we're going to let 2 come in at one time, like on the 9th of July. That's when it was. See, we started in January. 9th of July, 2 come in, and so we decided, and the newspaper said that they're going to have a trial period for integration, but if there's any problem, we're going to discontinue the trial. I thought that was crazy for the newspaper to say something like that, because if somebody wanted to keep it from happening, all they had to do down there is just start a problem, right? So we didn't want the KKK to know when and where we were going to do this integration. So we went the first day at 10 o'clock, and the next day at 4 o'clock, and the next day at 2 o'clock. Like that, just 2 people at 6 or 7 different restaurants. And by this time, the city felt that we were serious, and then they had some plainclothesmen to come into the stores and sort of lounge around at the cosmetic counter or at the magazine rack and keep the eye on the lunch counter, you see, to protect us. See, changing, isn't it? Changing, isn't it, when they found out we were serious. And sure enough, it went off without a hitch. And then, so we integrated the lunch counters, the restaurants, the hotels, the motels, the bowling alleys, the skating rinks, and the ballparks, and everything, 2 years before President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill. Almost exactly 2 years, because he signed it thank you. He signed it 2 days before the 4th of July in '64. And so we got our places open in 1962. And so that's what happened with that. Now, I believe you told me we needed some time for question and answers. I do have some more things to say, but I can go ahead and start with the question and answers now. Is this time for that? Okay.
Hi, I have a question.
All right.
Okay, I'm over here. That's okay.
Oh, over here.
Hiding away. I noticed in the actually beautifully done video that you had a picture of Little Rock and the and Elizabeth Eckford, I believe it is, who is going to school in Little Rock. And I'm wondering whether the integration of Little Rock High School, if that had an impact on you at all.
I had a picture of...
I'm sorry, in the video they had a picture of one of the students who was trying to integrate Little Rock, Arkansas. And I was just wondering if you...
I didn't realize that there was a picture on there of somebody who was trying to... I'm sorry, I apologize for that.
Oh, no, that's
I
okay.
was not aware of that. As I said, the teenagers at the college did that. So I didn't know about the pictures that they used. And when was that the Little Rock part came up? Did anybody else catch that? So you saw it. You saw it. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. I'm sorry. I don't know how that got in there, but it didn't have anything to do with Huntsville.
No, and I realized that. I was just wondering whether the incident in Little Rock, whether that had any impact in Alabama or any...
Oh, now, well, certainly when we heard about other places getting their school integrated and getting their counters integrated and so forth, it made us try harder. We were 2 years behind Nashville, and and it made us try harder. And we had some people who lived in Nashville who came down to talk to us and give us some pointers on some things to do. And we went to visit a lot of surrounding cities, Chattanooga and Memphis and Nashville and some other cities to find out just exactly how they got theirs going.
Okay, I applaud your courage.
Okay, I appreciate that. As well. All right.
Thank you for coming. I have a grandmother who went to Tuskegee University.
Yes.
And she spoke about the syphilis in Tuskegee. Could you do you have any information about that, or could you elaborate on that at all?
Well, now the only thing that I can say about Tuskegee right off the cuff is that when we went to Birmingham in August of '63 to have the court case in the federal court, I testified for the Huntsville group, and there were people there who came to testify for Tuskegee, and some other people for Mobile, and some for Birmingham. And Tuskegee integrated the day after Huntsville integrated. And then Mobile and Birmingham 2 or 3 days after Huntsville integrated.
We wanted to know about the Tuskegee experiment, the syphilis experiment.
About what?
The syphilis experiment.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. You said about the Tuskegee experiment. Is that what you were talking about? I apologize. I should have let her whisper in my ear what you were saying. I don't hear as well as I used to. But anyway, that's what you were asking me about. Did I know anything about the Tuskegee experiment? No, sir. I didn't know anything about it when it was actually going on. I've read a lot about it since then, but I did not know about it at the time it was going on. And once again, I apologize. I'm sorry I misunderstood you.
Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Yesterday on public television, there was a program about, it talked about how after the Civil War, that one of the things that was done to re-enslave African Americans, particularly African American men, was to find them guilty of some small crime, and then they would be put into a penitentiary, and then they would be farmed out to industry. And one of the things they said about Alabama was that at the turn of the century, Alabama was a huge industrial area, and Birmingham was part of that because of the coal mines
Yes.
and various
Yes.
industry. Could you and that they use those convicts as a way of enslaving them, because they could be beaten, their contracts, they were forced to sign contracts that made them work for sometimes years.
That's right.
And wondering if you can say anything about that from your Alabama experience.
Yes. When I was very young, I used to hear the people talk about the coal mine. Now, my wife was from Kentucky, and to her, being in the coal mines meant a whole different thing from Alabama, because that was one of the few ways that the minority people could really get ahead, by working in the coal mines in Kentucky. But now, our people used to say to the guys who were acting up, if you keep doing that, they're going to take you to the coal mine. And that's what they used to do, just like you say. They imprisoned them, and they put them in the coal mine, and I suspect they worked for almost nothing. And they used to, that was a sort of a punishment to put them in the coal mine. They used to do a lot of that. And they had a DVD program at the Civil Rights Museum. I don't know if any of you have been there. They talk about that down there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So your son was encouraged by his experience as a 6-year-old in a school where there was a young girl who said the N-word.
Yes.
And and he realized that it was education that was the difference. And do you still feel that that's going to be the solution for injustice, bias?
Education is going to make a tremendous difference. It's going to make a tremendous difference. Yes, yes. I've been advocating education for a long time as a possible solution, along with other things. Yes. Thank you.
I was just curious. Oh, thank you for coming, by the way. I'm big into musical types. I just like playing music, and I was wondering how much access you had to musical education back then.
Did I have any access to music education? Who is the person who's speaking here? Did I have any access to music training? I guess that's what he's asking me then. I started to bring my instrument. Couldn't bring it on the plane. When I was in the 3rd grade, I joined the band, and I was in the percussion section. It was a cigar box. That's what my instrument was. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but the school and the school board would not buy instruments, and the parents were not able to buy instruments. And I hope I'm answering your question. Is that what you're asking me about? Did I have access to? No. We had some music teachers, some people who had studied that in their college career, and they could have taught the students, but we didn't have real music education like we should have. Yes, my son likes to tell that all the time. She wants me to tell you the violin story. And now, how much time do we have? I don't want to go over time. We okay? All right, I want to tell the violin story. I used to write a lot of poetry. I just love to write poetry. See, I would plow, and when you're plowing, there's nobody out there but you and the mule and God, and you can think about a lot of things. And I bought a clipboard, saved up my money and got 15 cents and bought a clipboard, and I would think of things and jot them down when I got to the end of the row. And then the pencil had an eraser on top of it. If you didn't like it, you could scratch it out. So it's your poem, and you could add to it or subtract it anytime you want. So I wrote a lot of poetry, and I thought I was destined to write a song. And then I thought, you can't write a song unless you can play some sort of instrument. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but I thought I was right. And so I chose the violin. But I was already 31. It was just before the movement started when I started my violin lessons. So I had an excellent professor who was the conductor of the Huntsville Symphony Orchestra. And he allowed me to come to his house on my lunch hour every Wednesday and practice and get my violin lessons. He taught a lot of youngsters, but he also taught me with the violin. So I was finishing up my violin lesson one day, and this is what he said to me. He said, Dr. Hereford, we're having a concert at Huntsville High tomorrow night. And there's a gentleman who has moved here from St. Louis to work with the missile program, but his trunks have not arrived yet. He said he is a violin virtuoso, and I want to feature him on a solo tomorrow night, but I don't have an instrument worthy of his play. He said, yours is. Could you leave your instrument with me and let him play it tomorrow night, and then I'll make sure you get it. I'll bring it to your office the next morning. And I said, yes. And I left my instrument there with my teacher. And I went to my office and I saw my afternoon patients. And then I went to afternoon patients. And then I went to the hospital and made evening rounds. And when I drive home from the hospital, it's about 20 minutes. I reflect over what has happened to me that day, patient-wise and otherwise. And in about 10 minutes, it hit me like a ton of brick. My violin can go to the concert, but I can't go. I'm not worthy to go to the concert. I can't even go to the concert to listen to the man play my own instrument. Can you imagine how that made me feel? But that's the type of thing that we were up against. So that was a good time to tell that story.
Dr. Hereford, I just have a quick question regarding your view of how things are now compared to long ago. Audiences such as this, do you find that there's a high level of awareness or disconnects? And then what would you say the future is in regards to what you're sensing or seeing?
You going to tell me what you say?
So he wanted to know, looking at the audience today, what do you think our future is?
Oh, what do you think the future is? Is that what we're talking about now? Well, I did have a closing to talk something about that, but I'll say something about it now. I have been very concerned in our country now with this problem of drugs and problem of gangs, and I'm hoping that the teachers and the counselors will try to be more vigilant on that, to talk to these kids more about it. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. What is it about?
So he also wanted to know, think about the audience that we have here today, about how multicultural it is, and what does this hold for our future?
The one we have today.
Right now.
What can they do?
Yeah, and even maybe give us some action items, and if you think it can work.
Some action.
You got it.
Oh my. I don't know exactly how to answer that. You're asking me if we're going to be able to get action out of these people who are here today?
No, what I was saying is he wants to know, think about the audience we have today.
Yes,
And do you think that we're going to have a change for our future?
Oh, I'm optimistic. Yes, I'm optimistic that we're going to have a change, and I just feel like that things are going to get better. I think we're going to have more harmony and more camaraderie and more cohesion, and that people are going to have more interest in what the folks are doing and try to be more helpful for the people. Yes, I think it's going to change, and I think having sessions like this would be important. And another thing that I think would be very important, if we can visit each other's homes more and visit each other's churches more, or synagogues or mosques or whatever, I think that would be very helpful.
One final question? Anyone have a final question over here?
Yes. I would like to know, the gentleman here was talking about education, and you said you agreed with education plus some other things. What are those other things that you feel are important beside the educational component?
Beside education, in order to do what we're talking about?
You're talking about inclusion and eliminating racism and moving us forward.
Oh yeah, moving us forward. Yes, well, I would put education first. I would put education first, and I would put the association of people gathering together and talking things out, and voting and trying to get the right people into our political offices. I think that's going to make a big difference. And just those are the main things that I think about.
I think that was the last question.
Last question. Okay, I have a closing I want to do. I'm going to ask you to carry this around. We have many young ladies in here.
Yes, there are some young ladies in here.
All right. If we have some, so she's going to bring a picture around. If we have some young ladies in here, I have a special announcement, a special request. I want to say to the young ladies, can you see that picture? The young ladies. That's my wife, and she's going to be 80 years old. Her birthday. She doesn't drink, she doesn't smoke, and she doesn't use drugs. Would you like to look like that when you're almost 80? Now to all of the young people, young men and young women. I'm getting up in age. I'm 83, going to be 84 my next birthday. I've been fighting a long time. This is a relay race. I have a baton. I'm passing this baton to the youngsters, and I'm asking them to go out there and fight for freedom and equality every time you get a chance. Not only racial equality, but also gender equality. Okay? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Joyce Bosberry, Director of the Office of Community Engagement and Research. I would like to read a couple of lyrics from Dr. Hereford's favorite song called You'll Never Walk Alone by Rodgers and Hammerstein. And the lyrics go, when you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark. So on behalf of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the African Descendant Mayo Employee Resource Group, and the Black History Planning Committee, I'd like to thank you for coming out tonight. And Dr. Hereford, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today. Please give a big hello and a hug to your wife for us, and safe travels home, or as we say in the church, traveling mercies to you. And to each of you, let this day be an inspiration to you to move action in our community to increase diversity and inclusion. Thank you.